how does the 7800X3D perform in starters? And we are here finally to answer that question. We're comparing it to loads of CPUs today. We've got some big questions to answer, like, does the 7950X3D make any sense compared to the 7800X3D? Is it much better than the non-3D Vcache versions of AM5 CPUs? Does it blow this 5800X3D out of the water? And how does it scale at 4K? We did a little bit of 4K testing for those of you who like to see how that performs. So loads of things, really interesting data, some interesting things that I think have changed slightly with the game actually, and more and more and more and more. Let's get into it. The test setups are all in the description, so check those out. The main things to note is that it's 319.1, the live patch currently, and we are using 1080p as our resolution for all of it until we get to the 4K testing, because you can't really learn anything if you're GPU bottleneck, so you have to lower the resolution to do CPU testing. The results for this testing are effectively split into two categories. Ones where 3D cache really helps, and ones where it doesn't help as much. We'll start off with the ones where it does help. So we're starting off with quantum travel. Now, there's all sorts of CPUs. Let me just explain what we're looking at here. We've got at the top there, the 7950X3D, just the 3D Vcache CCD. So I've gone into the BIOS, turned off the CCD that doesn't have Vcache. So that effectively becomes a 7800X3D. You'll see that it effectively matches the 7800X3D as you'd expect. The 7950X3D result below there is the full whack one. We've also got the Intel 13700KF, and I have to tell you that it's not really a fair test for the Intel chip in these tests, because I'm on a DDR4 motherboard. I sold the DDR5 when I had, and what I found when I tested before is that it will improve with DDR5, especially as it's getting faster and faster. So you've got to give the Intel chip a little bit of extra wiggle room in your mind, because it would perform better than that with faster DDR5 RAM. But the key thing to learn from this is, again, look at the 5800X3D. It will not perform this well in all of the tests, but with the 3D Vcache in quantum travel, it seems to really help. The same in space. You've got the top two results basically matching the 7800X3D, effectively matches the 7950X3D when it's got the Vcache turned off. And again, the 5800X3D is doing really well. And so far, you might look at that and think, well, that isn't really worth the upgrade. The X3D, 5800X3D is doing really well. You're not seeing much benefit really. But as I say, that is going to change. But on the Horizon roof, it's the same story. The 3D Vcache seems to help all of those chips. There's not really any good reason why the 7800X3D is a bit further out in front. That's probably just run-to-run kind of variance. But when we move to these next few scenes, you'll see the picture slightly changes. Still, the 7950X3D and the 7800X3D are doing really well. They're still winning. But if you notice now, the 5800X3D has dropped below the 7700X and the 13700KF. And so there are certain scenes where it seems as though Star Citizen will really heavily utilize the Vcache, and there's certain ones where it won't. The good news for the AM5 X3D parts is that they're still at the top of the charts, even when the scene doesn't really use the X3D Vcache. Next, the Arc Corp run. It's the same story. The 7950X3D and the 7800X3D match as you kind of expect. But again, this isn't a scene that really utilizes Vcache, so the 5800X3D has really dropped down. It's starting now to look like more of a good upgrade from the 5800X3D to these new X3D parts. And to be honest, even the 7700X is doing really well. But as we saw before, it does lose out to the 5800X3D in those earlier scenes. And then in Lorville has become increasingly hard to run. The new update to it has made it really hard, but we're still around the 60 FPS mark here, which is really good news. You'll see again that the 5800X3D part has dropped way down the list, again signifying that this scene, this run through Lorville, doesn't really heavily utilize the Vcache. I think that might be to do with the optimizations that CIG have made, because in the past, the 5800X3D would be the 13700KF. So I wonder if something has changed and the extra clock speed that the 7700X and the 13700K have is now maybe being better utilized in Lorville in particular. And then for those of you who are often asking, can we see some higher resolution as well? I had enough time to do a bit of 4K. You will see here, effectively, we've lost a couple of frames for the top results, but they're not particularly GPU bottlenecks still at 4K. The 4080 that I'm using here is still powerful enough to basically outmatch these CPUs, which is a unique thing in games. Most of the time you are going to be GPU bottlenecked at 4K, but here, still the CPUs are the main bottleneck. And there are a couple of points around the run where it does become GPU bottleneck, and that's why we've lost a couple of frames on average. But there's not much scaling at 4K. So what to make of all this? Let's answer some of those questions from the start. Compared to the 7950 X3D, the 7800 X3D is just a much better option for Star Citizen and gaming. Yes, there will be some cases for some people who are doing work production stuff where the more expensive 7950 X3D makes sense, but for Star Citizen, that just is not the case. It is just a waste of money. And the whole thing we had when I first reviewed the 7950 X3D, that you would turn off the non 3D Vcache CCD and it would perform better. That's solved, at least. I don't know whether that would have been AMD, Microsoft, or CIG, but it seems as though it makes no difference now to performance whether you turn it on or off. But again, the 7800 X3D is just a much better option at a much better price. For the 5800 X3D, it's an interesting one because as we saw from the results, there were some where it was pretty close and then there was some where it was much, much slower. So the 5800 X3D is still a great upgrade option if you're on AM4. It does bring much better performance than, say, the 3600. But if you're building a new system, I think it's tricky to look past the 7800 X3D. It is an absolute beast. There are issues with AM5. We can't deny that. I had a motherboard, an Asus, pretty expensive, top of the line, all the fancy bits, all the kind of DDR5, the PCIe 5 stuff. It just stopped working. And to be fair, it hadn't been great since I first got it. There was issues with the BIOS. I'd have to unplug USB things from the back to get it to turn on. It had always been a bit of a nightmare. My hope was that with BIOS updates, it would improve, but it's just given out. So I've replaced that with a cheaper Gigabyte board, and that's been completely rock solid. But there have been issues with AM5. There's been CPUs overheating and kind of exploding. And so that obviously isn't good. That's kind of typical of AMD's first generation when they're on a new platform. There are often issues. It does tend to get sorted. So I would say we're getting to the point now where it's pretty safe. They've solved the overheating and exploding issue by reducing voltage. And so I think we're probably now getting to the point where they're a good, safe buy in terms of exploding and just working well. This new motherboard has been perfect for me so far. I would say from a performance point of view, from a lifetime upgrade path point of view, the AM5 CPUs are incredible for Star Citizen. They are the best out there right now. It's a great CPU, the 7800 X3D, and it's going to be my recommended CPU if you want the best performance in Star Citizen going forward.